Our journey started about 18 months ago, so we're not that far into it. I'm a financial advisor. Give me some numbers, and I can tell you what they say. Give me a journal of medical terms, and I have no idea. It's like reading another language. So our family unit is made up of me and my husband. We have a 12-year-old boy, and then Ian, who's a 9. When he was diagnosed, he was 8. It wasn't like he was sick. I took him into a normal doctor's appointment. I'm kind of somewhere between granola and doctors. I will use oils, but I still use medicine as well. So we hadn't really had a doctor's appointment for him in 3 years, and the school was insisting on one, so I took them both in. And the doctor was asking me all the questions that they go through when you show up. One of the questions he asked me is, has he had a lot of stomach issues? And to Ann's point, I said yes. And he's allergic to wheat, and that year he had decided he wasn't. So I just attributed to that. He was taking wheat from kids at school, and he was getting sick, so I assumed that that was part of it. He had terrible leg cramps. I thought that was part of growing pains. So I had a reason for each and every symptom. And he never slept through the night, so he was 8 years old, and he'd never once slept through the night. He slept a lot on the floor next to our bed. I have a lot of parent guilt looking back because we did the bribery. Hey, I'll pay you $200 if you sleep in your bed for 60 nights because mom really needs at least 60 nights of sleep. I'm going to discipline you if you don't. We did that. We tried so many things to get him sleep through the night, and now, of course, we know that we have the pins and needles in the hands and the feet, but he was so young, he couldn't describe it. And that's why people like Stephanie are so valuable to me as a parent, because a young child has no idea what is normal and what isn't. When he was diagnosed, he said, you mean no, you don't have headaches every day? Like, that was his question to me. And so I hope and pray that as we move forward, more pediatricians know about it. We lucked out because we were seeing a general practitioner. So he had seen it in older patients, so he knew what it was when he saw it. Anne talks about how sick her son was and spending time in the hospital before he was diagnosed. So I think there's both sides to this. When he was diagnosed, he was originally diagnosed with essential thrombocythemia. And I tell everybody this is a marathon, not a race, because I'm a great racer. I'm not such a great marathoner. Give me a problem, I'm going to solve it. We're going to move on to the next thing. This has been very, Cecilia talked about control, about power. This is something that will prove to you over and over and over again that you have absolutely no control, you have absolutely no power. So where can you take it back as a parent? That's what we want to do. We want to fix it. We want to take care of our children. We want to do these things. We don't want to see them in pain. And yet, yesterday morning when we went to leave, I woke up screaming because his legs hurt. And all I could think is, how fair is this? How fair is it that our children wake up like this? And yet, I gave him some medicine. And then on the way to the airport, he goes, Mom, the Tylenol's kicking in. I can handle this. And that's where, when Cecilia talks about Stephanie being our hero, that's my hero. That's the kid that screamed all night long, and I drop him off at school because he's got a test that day. And I go to work, and he goes in and he takes the test, and he brings home straight A's. And that's really, truly our heroes, right? Through a bunch of research, because there wasn't a lot for kids, I was able to find Dr. Christine. And I ended up with pneumonia the first month after his diagnosis because I would work all day and I would come home and research all night. And I think that as we learn and as we move forward, one of the big things is, I think, having a starting point for parents who have a place where they can go, and Anna's been developing that, where parents can go and they can find initial information immediately. I think there's a lot of incorrect information that's maybe older that we find because of the internet that isn't necessarily stuff that we should be looking at or wanting to know. I think sometimes it is also a struggle with people who just find out that the child could potentially have it, and they post on the sites that we're part of and talk about how scary it is, because it is very scary to us. And then they come back later and say, no, it's not, and then they walk away. Hope you all have good luck, and you're all just sitting there kind of emotionally struggling. So we went and saw Dr. Christine, and she was, very kind in that she sat down. Ian now calls her the vampire. She was very kind and explained a lot to us, and in fact called us from her, she was at camp with her kids. She had told us originally that Ian didn't need to start chemo, and she called us, and he had some of the highest JAK2 mutation activity that she had seen in a child, and she asked that we immediately get another bone marrow biopsy, so that was his second, and then request that he start the chemo. They consider, Dr. Steen's group says that he is unclassified because he's somewhere between ET and PV. MD Anderson, who I'll talk about later, says that he has PV. He also has something called acquired von Willebrand. So my athlete son was asked to stop all sports. And in a world where boys are, and I know that there's less, but in a world where boys are very much involved, and that is to some extent identity and their community, he lost it all in a series of over a month. So he went from going on chemo, which made him really sick, even initially more sick than he had been before that, and losing his community as well. And I think that is a piece that, as parents, that is very difficult to watch as well, because I think it's very isolating for our children. And it's very isolating for us as parents because we don't necessarily have somebody that we could talk to. And that's where the Facebook groups have come have been invaluable to me, because there's a group of people that I feel like understand, but our children don't necessarily have that. So I met Kathleen at the conference in San Antonio, and I asked that they allowed our children to come as well to this. And it's been very grateful. I've been very grateful that we brought our kids, because they can see that there's other people that are like them, and they're not isolated, and they're not by themselves. And it's very hard to be considered weird, because all of a sudden your friends who you were really part of, all of a sudden you just kind of disappear. They're part of these groups, and there's part of these teams, and they're part of all these things, and all of a sudden you're not. And an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old, and I think even me as an adult, don't have the words to necessarily explain to the people around you what's going on. And I think it's very difficult when you keep hearing, well, he doesn't look sick. And they weren't up all night with him as he screamed and as he was hurting, and giving him a cool cloth as he got sick. And they're not doing all of these things because he doesn't look sick. And I'm grateful that his hair doesn't fall out, but at the same point, I feel like he would maybe get a little bit of extra room or extra space if he didn't have hair. And that, then there's the guilt of that, right? So I think that it can be a struggle that way. Just the pieces where you watch your kid, to some extent, have the same expectations as the other kids, but they're starting at square -5, and the other kids are starting at 0. Doing really well. We switched him. When we went to San Antonio, we went to an adult MPN conference, and we didn't bring. Our big reason for doing that, my husband and I, was we're from Dallas, so San Antonio wasn't that far. But one of our biggest reasons for doing that is we wanted to hear from the adults. What were the symptoms that the adults were facing? Because I keep going back to that headache thing, right? What, that's not normal? I mean, he doesn't have the words to tell me necessarily how he's feeling, and I don't want to necessarily put symptoms into his mind either. So I wouldn't want to be sitting there going every morning, do you have a headache? I would much rather say, be able to listen to other things where I feel dizzy. Okay, then you can kind of tease it out of him rather than asking specific things. And I felt like if I understood what the symptoms of the adults were facing, I would have a better idea of how to ask better questions. So, and I have a long list of questions for you, Stephanie. What would you have liked to have, so that I think as we can come together as a community and we can hear from some of these people that are now in their 20s, that are now in their place where they can better describe to us, so that us parents who have young children or even in their teens, we can do a better job helping them, so that we can somewhat take a little bit of that control and a little bit of that power back, and so that they can have control and they can have power because they're feeling that same sense in a way as well. So we went, after that conference, we met Dr. Verstofik there, and we went down and we saw him. He had done some research on what Pegasus interferon can do has the JAK2 mutation, and that it can potentially put that into remission. So through that process, we switched from Pegasus interferon, or from hydroxyurea to Pegasus interferon. He had been on, he started out at 400 milligrams of hydroxyurea, or we started him out essentially at 10 milligrams per kilogram, and then eventually he was up to about 30 milligrams per kilogram, and he was sick. I mean, it just made him sick. Every day he'd get up, he didn't feel well. The Pegasus interferon has been a lot better in the sense that he doesn't feel well. So we give it to him every Friday night. It's a shot. And he has learned to fill a needle and do all of that, but he wants it in his arms because if you do it anywhere in your body, it can cause bruising and some kind of pain. So he doesn't want it on his stomach so he can still kind of run around with his friends. So he can't actually give him in the shot, but he gets it all ready to go. So then Friday night we give it. Usually Saturday night he does pretty well. Sunday morning, or Sundays, he doesn't really feel all that great typically. But then the rest of the week he feels really well. So you're supposed to overlap hydroxyurea interferon for 2 weeks. After week 1, he was like, I'm not taking that stuff. I'm not going to do it. And we looked at him and we let him make that decision. Again, back to that feeling of control. He doesn't feel like he's got any control in any of this, and that wasn't a decision that was going to hurt him. So we let him do it. So we said, okay, and he stopped taking it. And now he's doing really well. Back to the researchers for a second. There's a couple things that as a parent I would like to see. I would like to know, what should the numbers be? When you're looking at hemocratic, when you're looking at all these numbers, all the numbers I see are all adult numbers. What should a children's number be? I'd like to know if we're on hydroxyurea or if they're on Pegasus interferon or if they're on Jakafi. What are the things that I could potentially be looking for on a report? This last time we went in, his liver numbers were high. I didn't even know that that was a possibility. So that blindsided me in a sense that that's a test that they run after we leave the doctor's office, so the doctor had never mentioned it to me. So there's things like that where as a parent, I want to know those things so that I'm not blindsided by it. And I'm sure that we all have things like that. We all have pieces. We have an older child who sat me down, my 12-year-old going on 30. He sat me down about 6 months after his diagnosis, and he said, he came and he grabbed my hand and he sat me down and he said, Mommy, I need to talk to you. Okay. I want you to know you have another kid. You have another kid. And I need you too. And I thought, truly my child is going on 30. He's older than I am at this point, right? And I'm like, okay. Thank you for coming to me and saying that. That's a guts. I mean, his brother's sick. He sees that. His heart is 100%. He's my feeler. He takes care of everybody. But yet at the same point had the guts to come to me and say, hey, I'm here too. Remember me? And so we started doing things like I go on dates with him. I do these different things with him because he's also my son. And I think my husband and I, we started walking early in the mornings because the percentages of divorces when you have a kid that is sick is extremely high. If you do the research on it, it's extremely high. So how do we find a way to connect that's outside of this disease? So really, ultimately, what is my goal as I get involved? Obviously, a cure. I mean, come on. We all want that, right? We want that more than anything else in the world. We want our kids to feel healthy. We don't want people to be making comments like, well, maybe they shouldn't be having kids because they'll pass that on to the next generation. Yes, I've had somebody say that to me. We want to obviously have the cure, but more than anything else, we want to have a community of people. We want to be able to learn things like, did you know Lyme's disease was discovered by a bunch of moms got together and directed the doctors that, hey, it wasn't arthritis? That was moms coming together and saying to the doctors, we're seeing this, this, and this, and because of that, they did additional research and they discovered Lyme's disease. It saves how many thousands of lives on an annual basis now? They are willing to do the research, but to some extent, we can provide information that they don't have because they're not on the floor on a day-to-day basis. And I want my child to not feel isolated. I don't want him to feel alone. He's not alone. But it is a very isolating disease because there isn't another one in their school. There isn't another one in their, I mean, we've met another little boy. He's in Arkansas. We're in Dallas. I mean, it's not like we have to go pretty far to. We've met in Pennsylvania. We have to go to Pennsylvania. So I mean, there are people there, but they're spread out. So I want him to not feel isolated. I don't want him to feel alone. So more than anything else, yes, I want a cure. I want a cure. I want him to know. And I want to know if we should be worried about our other children. I want to know if my brother should be worried about his children. So as you all do research, thank you very much.